My mother-in-law. She leaves me to babysit the children while she goes away on a vacation. I guess she didn't realize that I'm going on the vacation too. Why would I not be? It's basically for my husband, her son, and here's the little deal to it. I paid for everything. I'm the breadwinner of the family, and I thought I would treat them to a vacation, and this is how she repays me? Well, you know what? What happens if I just cancel her tickets? I've been married to my husband for a little over 2 years, and my marriage has been an amazing one thus far. I was one of those people who did not fancy marriage, but after meeting John and getting to know him, I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life with him. However, my biggest fear, it became a reality. Simply because, while my husband does his very best to make and keep me happy, his family is determined to absolutely ruin that happiness. My mother-in-law, Carol, and her daughter, my sister-in-law, Deborah, have seemingly made it a mission to frustrate me in my marriage. I won't ever forget the first time I met them. I had not attended college, but I was very good at cooking and doing house chores, and I worked as a nanny for some time. A friend of mine thought of a business idea, and together we started a daycare service. You'd be surprised to find out how many parents were more than happy to leave their children in our care. Soon enough, the income was substantial, and I started my own business building facilities where children would never want to leave. I have a few in various states, and I was proud of my 5-year progress. But Carol did not find what I did remotely interesting. Granted, all she knows is that I run a daycare service, but that's all the information that she needs. She had not given me the chance to tell her more about my business, and I don't even think that she would be impressed if she knew. So I didn't really bother telling her. Debbie just, was as unmoved as her mother had been back then, except she was a bit more rude about it. I think it's safe to say that neither of them wanted me to marry John, especially after knowing my occupation and the fact that I did not have a higher education. They had done everything to stop my marriage from happening, but it had not worked out for them, and they hate me a lot more because of it. John was an aspiring civil engineer when I first met him, and he earns very, very well. I'm sure that they wanted someone like that as an addition to the family, but they got disappointed when John ended up with me. John, however, makes sure to remind me that he's lucky to have me as his wife whenever I let Carol and Debbie get into my head. I'm sure that he's tried talking to his family about their attitude towards me, but one thing I've learned about people is that you cannot make them change. A person will only change when they want to change, and a good reason is usually behind it. I've told John to stop trying to turn his family's heart around for my sake, and I don't know if he listened to me. I also want to mention a few things that I've done to make both Carol and Debbie see me as a better person and a better light. John had only interceded when none of them had worked or when my plans backfired on me. Debbie was going through a hard time in her marriage, and at some point I had volunteered to take her in and take care of her and her children. I made sure to treat her well, and we have gone on a few outings so that she would not feel so down during the entire thing. I'd also made sure to be available whenever I was needed, which was mainly to watch Debbie's kids or take care of the catering for any meeting either Carol or Debbie had. I don't think that they would believe me if I told them that I contributed to the money my husband sent Carol every single month. Well, sometimes I wonder why I go out of my way to help and take care of people who see me as someone beneath them. And all I can really say is that they're family, and that while I did not meet their standards, I'll keep trying my best to get them to see that I was more than worthy of being a member of their family. They weren't pleasant or friendly whenever I was involved, but I cannot recall a moment when I was insulted to the point where I could not overlook it. I hope that time never comes. This is slightly more personal, but another reason I let myself be treated like somebody with no self-respect is my husband. I knew that he and his family were not on good terms when I first saw them together, and it would not take a genius to realize that it was entirely my fault. John has tried multiple times to tell me to let it go, but I always see the sadness in his eyes when he talks about how much he doubts his mother and sister warming up to me. He doesn't contact them as often as he did when we were dating, and Carol and Debbie are always quick to pin it on me. I wasn't going to give up on John just because his family didn't like me so much. But
I could at least try to turn their feelings toward me around. It's been hard so far, but I guess I have not been putting in as much effort as I should have been. I think things will change for the better soon, though, and I have this good feeling about it, and I cannot wait to laugh about how much I'm stressed over making my extended family like me. My birthday, it's in a month's time, and I have plans for the entire family. My birthdays are usually uneventful because of how busy I am, but I've gotten an assistant now and can take a week off work. A trip to an expensive resort was the plan, and after talking it out with John, he promised to make himself available as well. I know for sure that Carol and Debbie would be available because Carol stays home most of the time while Debbie switches between freelance jobs. You know, all I had to do was confirm that they were being available, and the rest would be simple, easy. John agreed to help with that, and I think it's for the best as well. If he's the one to approach his mom and sister, that is. Honestly, the reason I thought of sponsoring a vacation for my in-laws was because of a recent incident. I attended a party of one of my husband's family friends, and all was well until Carol and Debbie arrived. You know, I tried to avoid them because I knew that they would be upset when they saw me, but it did not help. John had overheard Debbie bad-mouthing me to a few guests and had lost his temper, and to make matters worse, I'd accidentally hit Carol while trying to drag John away from the scene that he had created, and the drink in her hand had spilled all over her gown. Carol made sure to announce how expensive her gown was and insulted me and my job. She made mention of how careless I most likely was at my job anyways, and John shunned her before grabbing my hand and pulling me out at the party. Well, I can still remember the whispers from people as I left, and I'd rather not imagine what that would do to my business. I haven't heard from either Carol or Debbie since the incident, and whenever I bring them up to John, he gets upset. I know that I might fault some way, and I haven't been able to get good sleep in days. Anyways, that's all in the past. I can't wait to hear both Carol and Debbie's reactions. I'm certain that they'll love it, and hopefully it'll be the thing that will strengthen the bond amongst us three. Update number 1. Have you ever felt like you can never get anything right? No matter how hard you try. It was very surprising to see John walk in with a defeated expression after he had gone to visit his mother and Debbie. They had disliked the idea of going to the resort because both of them had visited at some point the previous year. It was upsetting to know that my plans to visit the resort would not come to fruition again. But what was even more upsetting were the insults I got from planning to go there with my family. Debbie had called and told me not to involve her in any one of my tacky plans. She was beginning to get on my nerves, and I could only hope that I had enough self-restraint because I didn't want to end up screaming in her face and destroying my plans of bringing us all closer. It took a while for me to get over the entire thing, but I did. And I forgot all about planning a trip. I didn't want a similar event to occur, and I was tired of all the insults from Carol and Debbie. Well, something eventful happened earlier this week. I learned that Carol had issues with her passport and have been chasing a job opportunity in another state. John had told me about it, and I had called to check on her. It was not a pleasant call, by the way, but she gave me an idea, and for the first time I had managed to get a thank you from Carol. One of my workers had a relative that would definitely help Carol with her passport problem, and I had done him a favor with one of his kids. So it wasn't hard to convince him to help out. Why, what had taken Carol weeks to get resolved took a few days because of my intervention. And she was so happy. I could not believe that I was the cause of her joy. It was a nice feeling, and I intended to make her smile more if it was in my power. John had thankfully come up with a good idea. Debbie has always wanted to travel out of the country, but she's never had the funds to go for that. And after asking her if she wanted to spend a vacation abroad, John knew that it was the perfect surprise for them. It was saddening that I had not come up with the idea myself, but I decided to sponsor the entire trip. John was going to tell his family and make the necessary arrangements for all of us after I picked the perfect place. I went ahead and I did my research and ended up being unable to choose. Luckily, Debbie and Carol had chosen their preferred places after John had spoken to them about it, and all that was left was funding the entire trip and making plans. Well, I was excited about everything, and so was John, despite it being country that he had been to before. I had to drill my husband to find out what Carol and Debbie enjoy doing, and with John's help, we had quite a number of options for sightseeing when we eventually traveled. A few hours ago, I get a message from Debbie, right? She mentioned me watching her 2 kids while we traveled, and in the beginning I thought she meant instructing my workers to take care of the children, but now that I've thought it through, Debbie would never leave her children in just anyone's care. I could be trusted because I was family, but she hated daycare, and her eldest homeschooled. Maybe she meant that I would take care of the kids during the trip, perhaps. I had honestly planned that they would stay with Mom till we got back, but I'll just have to get clarity from Debbie first. Update number 2. I can't believe that I've planned a trip for people who had no intention of letting me be a part of the entire thing. Now, I feel really stupid. I should have known that nothing was going to make Carol and Debbie see me in a better light, even after everything I've done for them and planned to do. I've tried reaching out to Debbie, but she was not taking her calls or replying to any of the text messages that I'd sent. I ended up visiting Carol to ask her to relay my messages to Debbie, because she was clearly ignoring me, only for me to see Debbie at Carol's house, and when I asked why she was ignoring my calls, she did not even give me a good answer. That was also when I learned that Debbie meant that I was to stay back and watch her children. At first, I thought she was worried about what would happen to them once we traveled, and I was more than happy to pay for all the expenses that would arise so that they would be a part of the trip. Debbie, on the other hand, said that she had no intention of bringing her children along for what was meant to be a vacation for her. I had told her to take the kids along, mentioning that I would talk to John about the entire thing. I even mentioned talking and taking them to Mom's place, knowing fully well that my mom was always happy to take care of the kids. I tried as much as I could to make her see that the kids would be fine whether or not they went with us. And I even mentioned the plans John and I had made for the trip. The only thing I had not wanted her to know was that I was funding anything, because I did not see the point in telling her details like that. When convincing Debbie, she seemed futile. I turned to Carol for help, but of course she went along with her daughter's planning, and in the end I left the house in irritation, knowing that I was not even worthy of being a part of the vacation I'd planned in the eyes of my in-laws. And until now, I sincerely wonder why I had not mentioned anything. It would have been nice to rub the fact that I was the sponsor of the trip in their faces and tell them that there's no way I would miss out on a vacation that I was paying for. John had asked what happened at his mother's house because Carol could not resist telling her son that I was rude enough to storm out of the house during a conversation. I told him everything, and my husband was sad for me and angry at his mother and sister. I told him to let it go, since it was a matter that concerned me and the woman in his family. I just had to find a way to convince them that the trip was plausible with me being a part of it. I don't know what happened for sure, but John had gone behind my back and tried making his mom and sister understand that I would be traveling with them. Whether or not they wanted me to, it was nice that my husband had fought for me, until he told me that they had thought that I had sent him to convince them. I got irritated at him and cut him off mid-sentence, knowing that they had yet another reason to dislike me. It was going to be much harder to convince them because of my husband's straight-up impulsiveness. Oh boy, well, I had gotten upset and yelled at him for doing that one thing that I asked him not to do. I know it's a mistake now, but believe me when I say that I was not thinking straight at the time. So, the end goal was to bring us four together as a family, a close one, and I didn't want to entertain any thoughts that would cause my plan to fail. John was surprised after, which is not his fault. We hardly ever argued, and I knew I should have apologized, but I stupidly kept quiet and forced myself to fall asleep. I've apologized now, but the awkwardness is still there. John had quietly told me to handle the situation as I deemed fit, as he would not involve himself anymore. These past 2 days have been tiresome. I had to go to work and be unable to focus because of the situation at hand. The lack of focus would turn to lead to a silly mistake. In fact, one could almost say it cost us a new client. I'd messed up when taking down her information, and she was very impatient. I've given myself a break, leaving the daycare in the hands of my assistant until I've sorted out my personal life. Now, like the stress, pain, and loneliness I'm currently dealing with aren't enough, Debbie just called to tell me that she would be bringing her daughter to the house the following night. She apparently has unfinished business to deal with and does not want her daughters exposed to any of it. I don't even know the details because I was too tired to find out. At the same time, I had to accept because it could be the start of convincing Debbie and eventually Carol. My nieces are sweet girls, but I'm honestly not in the mood to babysit anyone's child because of my current condition. It was why I took a break in the first place. I'll just have to ask one of my employees to come over and assist because I'm exhausted. I really am. I just hope I don't break down soon. Update number 3. I fell sick. It was only a matter of time, honestly. I had planned to take a break and let my employees do all the work, only for Debbie to dump her kids on me, and like that wasn't bad enough, I could not get anyone to help me with taking care of them, at least in the very beginning. Debbie had told me right in front of the children not to let anyone else stay with them. Throw in a couple more sentences with the word trust, trust, trust in them, and my conscience would not let me call an employee. John was working late, so I was alone with the girls. They were fun to hang with, but fun is not really fun when all you want to do is lay in bed and get some rest. Well, then came the headache, followed by the fever, and by the morning I simply could not get out of bed. It took a few days, but I got better after my husband's doting and some medicine. I was told to take some time off work as well because I was sick due to stress. When Debbie had come to ask me to watch her daughters yet again, John told her not to bother me because of my condition from the little I heard. Debbie was barely concerned about my illness, and I started to see her in a new light. She was quick to ask for favors and milk me dry, but when it came to being helpful or understanding, she could not even pretend. People like that would never see someone they don't like in a different light, and I think that was where I realized that I've been wasting my time getting her to see me as a sister. To further convince me that I've been wasting my time, John played me an audio. He had recorded a discussion that he had with his mom about me being a part of the trip, and that I and John had planned. I don't think I can say so much because it's painful, and I don't know if the pain is from the fact that my mother-in-law has never and will never see me as a daughter, or from the fact that I wasted so much of my time getting her to like me. She spoke about me like I was literal trash, calling me a liar for telling her that I was the sponsor for the trip, and calling me an unfit daughter because I was a nanny. As I cried in my room alone, I mentally slapped myself for not seeing the signs earlier, and John had told me that I was wasting my time, but I didn't really listen to him. Carol would suddenly turn deaf when I spoke about my job. If she cared a little, she would have at least done some research, but it's clear now that a nanny is what she prefers to see me as. Both Carol and Debbie were only ever nice to me when they needed something, and it never lasted, and they were quick to judge and embarrass me. So John apologized for playing me the audio. I could tell that he was sorry, and when he mentioned hating seeing his family messed up, I understood him. In a way, I think my illness helped, and I might have continued trying to impress my in-laws, but I don't see that ever happening again. After the sadness came the anger, and I was going to teach them a lesson. But it was not really easy for me to do so when they could not care less about me. It took a while, and I remembered the vacation then. I was sure both Carol and Debbie really wanted to travel, but that wasn't enough. There had to be something else involved, and then and only then would I be at peace with myself, and I can't care less what anyone thinks of me at this point. I've endured enough, and now it's time for me to repay what I've been given. Well, I'll update you guys again. Update number 4. Hey guys, well, this is just going to be a pretty short update. I just wanted to throw this one in there. So, I did try to get them to be okay with me traveling, but of course it did not work. I guess I gave them the benefit of the doubt one more time, so that's when it was time for them to get humiliated. I would not feel any sense of guilt, and Debbie even went so far as to tell me that she had a few other kids I could babysit from one friend of hers or another. She made it seem like she was doing a good favor for me, with that little fake smile and reassuring shoulder taps. But I could tell that she just wanted to make sure I stayed put. Carol tried as well, saying that somebody had to stay home in case anything urgent occurred in their absence. And those two, oh my goodness, it was so hard to keep my mouth shut and not tell them that they weren't traveling in the first place. I'm back at work now, but I've partly handed the branch over to my assistant and my mom to oversee. Why? Well, I'm not certain of this because John mentioned it when we were discussing travel plans, but there's a high chance that we might be relocating. He talked about having a good friend outside of the state who would assist him in getting jobs and encouraged me to think about it. I don't know, honestly. Sure, I've traveled out of the state a few times, but it's always been to my home. That would mean leaving my mother and starting again in an entirely different place. I know I sound very close-minded, but that's really how I feel about the whole thing. But I'll do as my husband said, and I'm sure he has his reasonings. Lastly, I had a discussion with Carol for a few hours. She had not wanted to speak to me, but John was not taking his call for some reason. I'll ask why when he returns from work, and she did ask me to make sure to send the ticket soon, and made a show of asking how I would cope alone being here by myself. There was false sympathy in the obvious mocking tone in her voice, and once again it was difficult to hold my tongue. She had also mentioned bringing back a few things for me so I would not feel so left out, but I'll never believe it. At least not anymore. I can't believe that I would have believed everything she said in the past. Man, I was gullible. Well, not anymore. In a matter of days, the tables will be turned. Final update. John and I are on vacation now, and we'll be returning home in just a few days. I can't say that I'm excited to go, but what I'm excited about is that the new life is ahead of me. John and I had spoken about relocating, and after thinking things through, I decided it was an amazing decision. My husband had already applied for a few jobs, and I had a branch in the States that we planned to move to. Most importantly, Carol and Debbie would be farther away from us. Before we traveled, John had made sure to confirm with his family would arrive at the airport, and they confirmed it, and after John had told me that Debbie was looking forward to making her friends envious of her, my mother-in-law was only after relaxation, though she mentioned having a prospective meeting over there. So it gave me an idea, one that was perfectly executed. I'd called Debbie to talk about her daughters and the trip, and I made sure to mention how envious I would have been if I were a friend and how it would be worse if they saw me, at the airport. Then I made it known to a few mutuals that Carol would be traveling. John had done his part by informing his family to meet us at the airport for their boarding passes, only for them to get there, Debbie with a small entourage, and see John and me. Carol gets upset immediately, asking what I was doing here, after being told to remain home. She almost started her usual routine of downgrading me. When I went, contrary to her will, I spoke up first. I told her that I would be traveling because I was the one who had paid for the tickets, and there was no way in hell I would be getting tickets for people who despised me. Debbie was upset. Concerned about her children and the fact that she was not getting to travel, John had sent her the address to my center, where we had left the children. They were in good hands, but Debbie was not having it and started to throw an absolute tantrum. She drew attention to herself, and of course, John and I distanced ourselves to catch the flight. The last thing I saw before getting on the plane was Carol trying to get on the plane and security approaching Debbie. John and I had made sure to block all the calls from both Debbie and Carol, and we had gotten messages instead. Carol threatened to make my life hell when I returned, and I promised to send her to prison if she dared to do anything drastic. Well, that's about it. Time to enjoy my vacation.